to a joint presentation of the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee and the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition concerning the Little River. I'm John Beal, Chair of the Crisis Committee, and with me here is the Secretary, Barbara Bell, who will assist me in communications. Also present on the Zoom call are Ernie Cooper and Tom King of the Board of Directors of the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. Also, Jack Shada, who's Stewardship Project Manager with the Coastal Mountain Land Trust. Also, Nate Gray, of the Division of Marine Resources, Bureau of Marine Fisheries, who's a sea-run fishery and habitat expert. Tom and Nate Gray will be available to answer questions within their areas. Jack and Ernie will make presentations after me. So the reason we're here tonight is we want to get public input with regard to the future of the Little River in Belfast. One goal of the Climate Crisis Committee is to specifically consider how decisions about the future of that river can contribute to Belfast addressing some of the goals in the governor's Maine climate plan issued 12/1/20. The immediate goal for tonight is to provide an open forum for the community's ideas about what it wants the future of the river to look like, so that we can provide that information to the city council and the city manager, who can then take those views into account in deciding what next steps to take on the subject. As many of you know, the Governor and the Maine Climate Council have developed a plan to comprehensively address how the state can both mitigate and adapt to climate change. On December 14th of last year, the Climate Crisis Committee hosted a program with Brian M. Brett, Senior Climate Resilience Coordinator with the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation, and he presented an overview of many aspects of the plan as may apply locally. That presentation can be viewed anytime on the Belfast Free Library website. Tonight, we're focusing on one particular aspect of the state plan and one area where we think it could be applied in Belfast. At page 77, the state plan notes, with respect to coastal marine areas, that protecting and restoring coastal marine ecosystems benefits biodiversity, protects our communities from the impacts of climate change, and stores carbon. Seagrasses and tidal salt marshes act as natural barriers to waves, and protecting floodplains, wetlands, and streams helps to reduce flooding. So we think that restoring wetlands and the associated coastal ecosystems of the Little River could be one way to further these aspects of the state plan. Associated goals could also include more carbon capture, increased biodiversity, ecological health, and new recreational opportunities. The agenda is that I will make a brief presentation concerning the background. Ernie will then talk about the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition position, and Jack Shada will then talk about the Coastal Mountain Land Trust activities and position. To make a comment or to ask a question, go to the chat button on the bottom of your Zoom screen and type in a question on the chat box. Or you can send us an email to belfast.sit.sci, which is short for citizen science, at Gmail. We've already had a number of very good questions come in. And that may in fact be the best way for you to put something in that's longish. If you want to speak tonight, you need to state that in your comment. And if we can, we will call on you to expand your comments if you need to. We do have a lot of people here tonight, so don't get your hopes up. One ground rule that we would like you to respect is that this meeting is not about the wisdom, the merits, or the advisability of the Nordic Aqua Farm. That subject has been dealt with.
Excuse me. What are people on the phone supposed to do
Listen, you should be muted, right?
as far as for comments?
If you want to make a comment, you type into chat or send us an email.
No, I'm on a phone.
Ah,
John,
You can call into this as well. There must be other people on phones.
there's only one person on the phone that I'm aware of, and that's you. So when the presentations are over, if you have something that you want to comment, please just let us know. We'll accommodate you because you're on a phone, okay?
Yep. Okay.
great. Thank you, Beth. So, if you would keep to the subject matter tonight, which is not the merits of the Nordic Aquafarm. So this slide is an aerial view of the two reservoirs. Some background on the Little River. It borders Belfast and Northport. It rises in the hills near Belmont and empties into Belfast Bay. For over 100 years, the free flow has been impeded by two dams, which presently create the upper and lower reservoirs. Originally, those dams were built and required by the Belfast Water District in order to supply drinking water to the city. However, beginning in the 1950s, the Water District relies on wells and has not used the water in the Little River for water supply since the 1980s. At a recent planning board meeting, the Water District indicated that it is not interested in continuing to own and maintain those dams, although it has no immediate plans. I understand people have been interested in the future of the Little River for many years, well before Nordic arrived on the scene. Some people have cherished the lower dam because of its picturesque appearance, which has been on the city website and magazine covers. Some people are concerned about the dams as they have gradually deteriorated over time, especially the upper dam. Others have thought removal of one or both dams would be a way to restore the natural flow of the river and perhaps to reintroduce fish species now blocked from spawning in the river. Throughout Maine, rivers have been reopened to free flow and native species have begun to repopulate the state. These issues have emerged now as subjects for public discussion for several reasons. Most immediately, the plan by Nordic to build a salmon farm would result in destruction of wetlands and habitat adjacent to the river. Also, the project includes the right of Nordic to purchase the lower dam, so the question of what will happen to the dam and the river has become a matter for public discussion. As the Belfast community has reviewed the status of the river, other issues have also emerged. First, it's become clear that the upper dam is in poor condition, and that condition should not be ignored, especially as Nordic's proposed visitor center, the lower dam pump house, is situated by the lower dam, and if the upper dam were to collapse, flooding of that building in Route 1 could result in injury. Second, the world and Maine have agreed that climate change is real and needs to be addressed now. Hence, the governor's climate plan and our climate crisis committee's goal of helping the community to implement the plan, however feasible in Belfast. The Little River could play an important role in mitigating climate change through wetland restoration, carbon sequestration, and renewal of the coastal ecosystem, among other impacts. The city has issued permits to Nordic last month. For purposes of this meeting and our discussion tonight, we accept as given that Nordic has been given permission to proceed. However, whether or not Nordic proceeds with its project, the future of Little River needs to be addressed, hence this program. Let's look at the dams. The upper dam is over 100 years old and has some serious issues. The Army Corps of Engineers inventory of dams lists the year of completion as 1910 with significant potential. The July 2018 engineer study by Wright Pierce Engineers indicates that prior inspections have concluded that significant concerns regarding the integrity of the concrete comprising the main spillway structure and likely instability in the form of low resistance to sliding and overturning of the dam. Their recommendation, given the condition of the dam and the fact that it's nearing the end of its useful life, is to remove the entire dam should be considered. Other alternatives would be rebuilding the dam or partially removing the dam. It would appear that the upper dam may be unstable, and that instability cannot be ignored. With climate change and increased severity and frequency of heavy rainfall, in the event of a very heavy rain, there's a possibility of upper dam collapse, inundation of the lower dam and the old pump house and Route 1. The lower dam was originally built near the end of the 19th century. The top 3 feet of the original dam blew out in 1943, inundating Route 1. It was rebuilt in 1943 to its present form. The engineer's report did not identify imminent hazards, but identify potential areas of concern, including stability of the left retaining wall, the need to repair the flow chamber and vault, and install a lower level drain. At a recent planning board meeting, the Belfast Water District indicated that since it's not using either upper or lower impoundments as sources for city water, it might not be able to justify using ratepayer funds to maintain them. Nordic Aquafarm project does not include any aspect of the upper dam. With respect to the lower dam, Nordic has the option to buy it in connection with the fish farm, and its decision as to whether or not to exercise that option may be affected by this community's desires regarding the future of the river. Nordic's original plan was to use the impoundment behind the lower dam as backup water source for its fish farm in the event of a shortfall from the wells that it plans to use as primary sources. Obviously, that implied that the lower dam would be kept in place. However, at another recent planning board meeting, Nordic indicated that although it has the option to buy the lower dam for use as backup water source, it could instead use free-flowing water from the river. Nordic might therefore not need to preserve the lower dam if it builds its fish farm. So it seems that these impoundments are not needed by the Belfast Water District and maybe not by Nordic. This is a picture, I think, from Wayne Marshall during the Nordic hearings, which shows the area around the lower reservoir, which is owned by the city, as well as a part in the upper reaches of the river, which is subject to a Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition easement. One of the conditions of approval by the Bureau of Environmental Protection of Nordic's plan is imposition of a wetlands mitigation fee of up to $760,000 payable by Nordic to the state. Belfast can apply for money in that fund to be directed to wetland restoration or increase along the Little River corridor, along with increased carbon sequestration and restoration of coastal ecosystems. This slide shows a generic drawing of the kind of wetland restoration some projects have envisioned. At this point, no restoration designs have been developed. First, a decision has to be made about what should be done with the river. Only then can feasibility studies can be made depending on what the community hopes to see in this river. So that's a brief picture of some of the background of why we're meeting here tonight. I'm sure I've left out some facts and history which may be relevant to our discussion, and if so, you're invited to supply them. Before I go to our next speaker, let me again note the ground rule with respect to subject matter. Nordic, the wisdom of Nordic is not on the table here today. Again, you can enter comments in the chat or send us an email. Now, turn the meeting over to Ernie Cooper of Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. Ernie?
Okay, thanks, John. Belfast, I suspect almost all of you, if not all of you, already know about the BBWC, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about who we are. It's a local conservation organization, been around for over 20 years. And our interest is in educating people about and helping to preserve the Belfast Bay watershed. The Belfast Bay watershed collectively consists of 4 other watersheds, actually 5 counting the coastal watershed: the Goose River, Westcott Stream, Pisagasawakeag, and Little River. And BBWC has an interest in all 4 of those, although perhaps a little special interest in the Little River because of the fact that the Belfast, or the Little River Community Trail was constructed by the BBWC in the early 2000s, and is popular with our group, and I think popular with the community. So, but our interest in the Little River goes beyond, certainly we're interested in conservation of the trail, but we're interested in conservation of the watershed, the watersheds collectively, and the watershed of the Little River. And of course, interested in opening the rivers wherever possible. There's the 4 rivers, opening those rivers wherever possible for fish passage, either by taking out dams or by constructing fish ladders. So I think I do want to say that the BBWC is glad to take part in this conversation. We're glad the community is having it, and we want to assist in doing whatever positive thing we can do for the Little River watershed. But we'd also love to have, at some point in the future, have similar conversations about the Goose River and the Pisagasawakeag River, which also have dams that are not great for the fish and for the bay. So with that, I just want to say I'm pleased that my fellow board member Tom King is able to be here. He had a career working in the operation of a fish hatchery, and is very familiar with the how fish take to rivers and how rivers take to fish. So hopefully he can help answer any questions there might be about that. I think with regard to, I do want to give a little attention to the Little River Trail, at least a little background. The Little River Trail was begun in 2005 and finished in 2007 by an agreement between the leadership of the BBWC and the Belfast Water District. And that agreement is based on a handshake. There's no contract, no easement, no special thing. The Belfast Water District heard us, our leadership at the time, that the trail would be a good idea, and they said, "Yeah, go do it." And it's been great ever since. We have a wonderful relationship with the Water District. The Little River Trail, you can see on this map, the red dotted line follows from the lower dam, basically follows the side of the lower reservoir and the Little River up to where the upper dam is. As was pointed out earlier, most of that goes through Water District property. There is a short distance that goes through a private landowner's property, but the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition has an easement, a formal easement for that. The trail then continues up past the upper reservoir and into the next to the river above the reservoir. And all of that is on Water District property, and then veers off to the north there. That goes through some county land, and then into some city land over by the airport, and comes out at the dog park in Walsh Ball Fields, which is city property. The trail actually continues on the other side of the road behind the Y and the middle school, and ends up at the Hutchinson Center, but that's of no import here, although it's a nice walk. Anyway, that's basically it. We are look forward to community input. We look forward to as John indicated, there may be some money to do some restoration work, and I think we have to all be concerned about how long that upper dam is going to hold, and what can be done there. So with that, I just want to say welcome to all of you. We're glad to co-sponsor this in order to try to get as much of the community involved as possible. And thank you for being here. So, back to you,
Thank you
John.
very much, Ernie. Again, our next speaker is with the Coastal Mountain Land Trust, Jack Shada. Jack, you want to take over?
Sure. Thanks, John. Thanks, Ernie. Similar to BBWC, I think pretty much everyone here knows about Coastal Mountains Land Trust. I'm a stewardship project manager. I work on our properties in Waldo County. Although our office is based out of Camden, we have some other properties in Knox County. For those who don't know, if there are some of you out there, we're the local land trust for this area, for the Western Penobscot Bay. We work in 15 towns. We have 35 preserves, 19 of them are in Waldo County. I think there are 5 in Belfast, but I could be getting that number wrong. We manage conservation easements and approximately 50 miles of trails throughout our region. And we're very interested in the Little River and the land around it and the trails around it in particular. I just wanted to show this map of the Little River watershed that John described at the beginning to give you a sense of what we're talking about, where the water comes from, and then some of the conserved land in the area. The red land is Belfast Water District, and then green is different conserved properties. If you guys are familiar with or not familiar with the conservation land, it's a smattering of small to medium-sized conservation properties, some owned by the municipalities, some by conservation organizations, some that are easements. Again, this is similar to the map John showed, but this is showing both reservoirs, and in red is the property owned by the Belfast Water District. And that's kind of why Coastal Mountains is really interested in the Little River. One of the main reasons is we are interested in seeing as much of this land as possible be conserved. In addition to the areas around the lower reservoir that John showed, there's a very large parcel above the upper reservoir. It's almost the entire border of the upper reservoir, including the land the trail goes over, that the Belfast Water District currently owns. As John mentioned, they're interested in selling it or disposing of it somehow. It is wrapped up in the Nordic proposal, like all this property, but we're hoping that it will transfer in some way and be conserved. And then lower down here, this green property here is our McClellan Poor Preserve. I'm sure many of you have visited it. There's a trailhead on Route 1 right by the Little River Vet, and a trailhead on the Herrick Road. It is very near the lower reservoir, but because of this little buffer property that the Water District owns and maintains on the lower reservoir, Coastal Mountains owns no river or lake reservoir frontage in that preserve. We have a small trail easement with the Water District that lets our trail pass over their property. I'll show on a map a little bit later. And yeah, similarly, we have a very positive relationship with them. So we, again, another interest of ours is seeing that conserved. I'll just go to a map of the preserve itself so you can see in a little more detail. This is the trail we manage. You can see this little area. The trail doesn't actually go into the reservoir. That's just a mapping error. But a little bit right here goes on the water company property. So it's really this buffer is one of the things we're keenly interested in. Echoing the comments of Ernie and BBWC, Coastal Mountains, again, we'd like to see this land conserved. We think it's a tremendous community asset, given all of the attention directed towards the Little River. We really want this to be community-driven, community-led process. We're happy to be a partner in that and to be a supporting member and support really the wishes of the community. Our expertise is much more on land and conservation and trails rather than fish passage and water, but we're happy to work in conjunction with other groups on those issues. That's all I really have for now. I'll chime back in, to answer questions, about land, about conservation and other things I have knowledge about. If you do have particular questions for me in the land trust, you can go to our website or write something in the chat and I can get in touch with you. So with that, I'll give it back to John.
Thank you very much, Jack. One thing, Ernie, I don't know if you mentioned about the existing easement that BBWC has on the river between the two reservoirs. Did you mention that?
Yeah, I did mention it, and that is actually the only legal claim we have to the trail, the side of the trail. It's all rest of it's all a handshake between us and various entities, mostly the water district, but also the county and the city.
Okay, so we've had a number of emails and chat questions. Well, I'll go through some of them and see if any of our presenters can respond. One thing you need to remember is we are here today to take public input, not necessarily to answer a lot of detailed questions. But having said that, the first question is, how does removing forest cover for any industrial operation in the watershed contribute to carbon loss and defeat carbon capture? What inventory of city and county trees has been done, and what incentives are given to residents to plant more trees? My understanding, and looking at the Nordic application, is that there was an inventory of trees on that project, but I think this question is asking about city and county trees, so it's a broader question. I am not aware that we have yet done a full inventory, although part of our greenhouse gas inventory that we're doing this year may involve determining the amount of tree contribution. As for removing forest cover and the contribution to carbon loss and defeating carbon capture, I would defer to any of the rest of you who have a well-informed answer. Hearing no answer, I'll move on. Amy Grant, on behalf of Upstream Watch, has indicated her happiness that we're doing this project. And she indicates that the Upstream Watch has hired dam experts, fish experts, naturalists, and engineers to study Little River and related estuaries, and they would gladly offer this information to Belfast Climate Crisis Committee if the committee is interested in our participation. Let me say that the city is interested in the participation of all people of goodwill, and we really appreciate that offer. On the other hand, this Climate Crisis Committee has not been given the task of handling whatever comes out of this meeting. Essentially, we are gathering information for the council and for the city manager, and they will be carrying forward the actual dealings with Nordic, the water district, etc. To the extent that they ask the Climate Crisis Committee to continue participating anyway, we'll be happy to. But at this point, Amy, I think that all the information you have developed and all the expertise you've gathered would probably be well offered to the city. Alan Cohen has asked what dollar amount of ecotourism and fishing tourism contributes to the total tourist dollars. I don't know that. Does anybody else have an idea? Maybe Nate?
I'm really not sure what those numbers are. I really can't tell you.
By the way, from the DMR. Go ahead.
I don't know. I really don't know what that answer is.
Yeah.
It can be significant depending on the fishery. And that's all I can tell you.
Joanna Evans asks, do we have a sense of what it would cost to remove the upper dam and who would pay for it? What would fall into Belfast, or are there other state funds available to such projects? I think it's fair to state that we don't yet know what the cost would be, partly because no survey has been done. In July of 2019, Interfluve, a river rehabilitation company in Waldoboro, gave us an estimate of, I think, $120,000 for a study for the removal of dams and rehabilitation of the rivers. But that's just to do a study. Then who would pay for it? Well, the funds in the mitigation fee I talked about might be available. But Jack, you can talk more about that and how that works.
Yeah, just in terms of, I would invite maybe Tom or Nate if you wanted to estimate a cost. The closest project of a similar scope to this was probably be dam removal on the Sheepsket River. That happened in the last few years, and that project, I don't know the exact number, but somewhere about $500,000 for that project. So it's fairly expensive. In terms of funding, there's a lot of state and federal grants available for this. Just within the state, there's that wetland program, the MNRCP, that John mentioned. There are a number of other state grants, and there's a lot of federal money and private foundations as well. So that Sheepscot project, for instance, had a lot of success with grant funding for these projects. I don't believe the municipalities there contributed much money towards those projects.
So I think it's, as Jack said, there's a lot of foundations, private foundations, that are interested in helping to open waterways. And this is not going to happen overnight. The city will have to deal with the parties and figure out what they wanted to do, figure out where the money could come from. What we're doing here tonight is trying to give the city an idea of where people stand on what they want done. Sid Block has indicated he has some personal observations about current recreational use of the lower reservoir. Sid, are you there? You can unmute yourself.
I am, thank you.
Yeah.
So I would say that, there are many different interests involved here. I could certainly see that returning the salmon to the river to spawn would be a good thing. And I would be concerned about the removal of the dams leading access to the river by and for business interests. As far as my observations of how people use this area, obviously the trails are, I think, probably the primary public use of these areas, and are enhanced a great deal by the presence of the reservoirs for what that's worth, particularly the lower reservoir. I was watching some ice skaters out on the lower reservoir today, and it reminded me that the lower reservoir is used for ice fishing, for ice skating, for cross-country ski in the winter, and during the summer is used for canoeing and boating and fishing by local residents. And it's also in and of itself a wildlife habitat, which needs to be taken into consideration. I've watched the beaver out there, the herons, a myriad of ducks, otters. We even had one mink wander by. And I think that it's eagles, and so I can just say that there is some value for as long as the lower dam might last on its own for both recreational and wildlife habitat. And
Thank you.
again, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nate, do you have any thoughts on the question of carbon sequestration or habitat restoration, having an impoundment versus a non-impoundment?
Yeah, I've been pretty closely involved in multiple dam removals, including the removal of Edwards Dam in Augusta, Fort Halifax Dam, and a bunch of other ones. Typically speaking, as far as species biodiversity and overall healthy functioning ecosystem, dam removal is a pretty good alternative to the installation of fish passage, simply because fish passages are at a minimum $50,000 per vertical foot, and they're very expensive to both engineer and install. And once you have a fish passage, then of course the game isn't over. Simply because you've installed fish passage, you have to maintain that structure. And you know, and in the case of the upper and lower reservoirs in Belfast, and forgive me, I didn't have much time to brush up on my chops prior to this meeting. You know, there's habitat there for a multitude of species, American eel being one, blueback herring potentially. I'm not even sure what's in extant in the system now as it stands. As far as carbon sequestration goes, you know, it would certainly sequester a lot more carbon as a stream segment than it is as a ponded reservoir. And that's just, I don't have to run the numbers. I just know it will, because it will reforest eventually, and there will be some wetlands associated with it. There you have it.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate that.
John,
Yeah,
John?
Yeah.
As far as salmon goes, that's not salmon habitat. You know, there's going to be no returning salmon to that river. And when you look at the history of that river, you know, it's only an 8-mile river, and it drops 350 feet maybe. You know, there are some really good pockets for brook trout, and they're more in the upper level of the river, and probably could be in the lower river too. But you know, being dammed for over 150 years and then 100 years on the upper dam, you know, we've seen a lot of you know, change in the whole system. The one thing that, you know, does happen when you do create dams, your water stratifies, and the lower part of the reservoirs turn very warm and have and very little oxygen. So there's the fish habitat remains to be in dams, remains to be on the more of the upper part. And they're basically right now a cool water and a warm water. The dams, the lower and upper reservoir are cool and warm water species. The big fishery for the black crappie was in the upper reservoir, but now that we've lowered that level, there's not the fishery for black crappie. The habitat isn't there anymore. There's chain pickerel in there. There's probably suckers, white suckers, and you know, some pumpkin seeds. There's probably not a lot of you know, in big abundance now that the upper reservoir has been lower. The lower reservoir has never really contained a huge amount of population of fish. You'll find as you go upstream, you'll find that, you know, you do have the black-nosed dace and you do have chubs, which are compatible in habitat with the brook trout. And you have to realize right now that Maine is the last stronghold in the nation for brook trout. Brook trout habitat is disappearing throughout the entire East Coast. And so Maine initiative to, you know, for brook trout is being funded. So that is a very important thing to realize. And just jumping back a little bit to the dam scenario, there is funding available through 2 government agencies, feds, but you really have to go through a lot of hurdles, and nothing takes, you know, nothing moves quickly. There's a lot of permitting, as you know, Nate knows, but NOAA has funding for availability, and also USDA, their Natural Resource Council, has funding for availability for dam removal and fish passage. So there are opportunities for, some type of work to be done there and some funding. But and if you remove both of those dams, there are some feeder brooks. If in fact they are, not intermittent, they possibly could have, brook trout population and in that lower section. And with that, there's a possibility that you could potentially have a sea-run brook trout population established. The one thing that would be a barrier to that would be there is, when you go from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir, when you walk the trail, there's that little gorge there. I call it a gorge, it's just ledges. And I don't know if the brook trout would be able to get over that, knowing that the brook trout for sure are in the upper stretches. If in fact there are brook trout in the lower streams that feed it, I don't know if there are, but if there were, they wouldn't have to go over the ledges. They could work out of those streams. But that's a possibility. And when you take a fishery away for 150 years, it's not going to come back tomorrow. We've been very fortunate, as Nate can tell you, with the Edwards Dam and the Kennebec and what's happened there. And we're seeing great returns on the Penobscot too, just by dam removals. So it does take time though. It's been 20 years for the Penobscot and probably 20, I'm sorry, not 20 for the Penobscot, 20 for the Edwards Dam, right, Nate?
Yeah, 1999.
Yeah, and probably now, I don't know, I'm gonna say 12 or so for the Penobscot. They started
5.
great work.
Yeah,
5.
5. Yeah.
Right. So you can see what happens in river systems when you do open them up. So this river system, I think, isn't quite as vibrant as those river systems are because they are so big. And but there is that possibility to return, a sea-run brook trout population, maybe not. And if you go back in history, I'm sure there were other, critters like Nate says, and we all know that eels are in that river. They've been there since, if you read the history, when the dam blew out, the eels were there in 43. So they're still there. But there's no real salmon habitat there. That's not a possibility to return salmon to that river.
Nate, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, he did an admirable job of basically, covering the bases. Certainly brook trout habitat, eel habitat. I'm not sure historically, I haven't had time to research the Little River. I'm not as familiar as I am with the duck trap. But it is 8 miles worth of, what would be stream habitat. Little river habitat, as it were, if it were to be contiguous. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have another question. What dollar value has been given to the ecological services the wetlands contribute to the well-being of our human and wild community? And resources be made available to actually quantify those ecological services? I think that would be part of the assessment to be made about what choices to make and what the benefits would be. Again, this discussion is about beginning the conversation about what those benefits will be and what the process will be to get those benefits. Having said that, any of the other participants want to kick in?
Yeah.
No.
When it comes to ecological services and quantifying them monetarily.
The next question is, does a wetland?
Yeah. Priceless.
That's the answer. Does a wetland restoration mean removal of bordering tall pines? I don't think it does, but your thoughts?
No.
The idea is to restore the land, not continue to destroy it. We have an extensive email from Andy Stevenson. I'll say what they are, and some of them I think have already been addressed. He asks, how much will it cost to remove the dams? How will it be done? Where does the money come from? Again, we've talked about that. Are there prior dam removal projects that are roughly comparable to what we undertaken on the Little River? What lessons can we learn from them? Nate, you've just discussed a couple of relatively comparable situations, and from what I've heard you say, we can learn good things from them, that we can actually restore some fisheries.
Indeed.
Mentioned the Sheepscot Dam.
Yep.
Yeah, Sheepscot, the outlet stream, Sandy River, there's a pile of them.
Okay, and then will the committee and Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition urge the City Council, Belfast Water District, and Northport Village Corporation to aggressively pursue restoration or restoration? Sorry, Andy, you just wrote that wrong. We're not in the business of aggressively urging anybody to do anything. What we're doing is trying to collect information from the community, and we can then provide that to the city with our recommendations. What are your thoughts about placing all the land along the river into conservation easement as a means of protecting the long-term benefits of any improvement to this river or the reservoirs? That's probably Ernie or Jack's area.
Yeah, I'll hop on that, and Ernie, feel free to jump on my coattails. That would be a fantastic outcome for it either to be an easement that's held by us or BBWC, or potentially a third party, or potentially owned by one of our organizations if the city was not interested in owning it. I can say that little buffer strip next to the lower reservoir, it's been discussed that will go to Coastal Mountains from the city of Belfast in past planning board meetings. I can't guarantee that will happen, but it likely will. I think the city has a strong interest to conserve any property that they get, either through easement or transfer. In terms of the upper reservoir property that I showed earlier, I think there's similar will there, but it's not tied into the Nordic deal in the same way, so that there's less clarity around that. And because of how long that Nordic project's taken, it's kind of tied up the conservation of it, not because it makes it impossible or really has any impact on conserving those other properties. It's just the relevant players there, the Belfast Water District and the city, are just kind of waiting until that's approved so that they can move forward with conservation.
Thank you, Jack.
Can I just add, I think in our discussions with the city, they've indicated that one of their reasons for including that buffer as part of the Nordic deal was to be sure that the Little River Trail was protected. And so we have every reason to believe that the handshake deal we have with the water district will continue as a handshake deal with the city to continue the trail past the lower reservoir. The upper reservoir, that our trail through the upper reservoir, that's still with the water district. We're going to have to watch how they dispose with that. I think, I hope they'll, and I have every confidence that they'll take the continuance of the trail into consideration in how they, whatever they do with that land. So.
Thank you, Ernie. We have another email from Steve Byers asking if the Penobscot Indian Nation has been consulted with requesting input or suggestions. A historical review from their centuries of knowledge, culture, tradition can be very helpful. and they suggest a link. The Upstream Watch message from Amy Grant contains some similar references to Indigenous values. I think that would be an excellent input. Again, it will be up to them to contact us. I'll follow up on this link. We certainly would appreciate whatever input they want to offer. Any further messages?
No,
We had a person on the telephone. Do you have a comment you want to make? Or have you gone home? Hearing nothing.
I am no longer on the telephone. Amelia came and I didn't know how to unmute this.
Okay, you're on. Do you have something to say?
It's too hard. The computer's too hard. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, even if you can't speak now, and I'm speaking to everybody here now, I've given you our email address, and the easy way to remember it is Belfast Citizen Science, belfast.cit.sci@gmail. I would love for you all to send comments. In particular, I only really heard clearly from one person tonight that he was opposed to removing dams. I think Sid made an interesting argument for why the reservoir as it presently exists is a valuable asset. I think it might be valuable to the city to hear more thoughts about whether or not removing one or both dams and restoring fish passageways is valuable, and what other considerations we have. I think one thing to remember is the upper dam is precarious and it's not going to just stay the way it is. Something's going to have to happen with it. So I would invite everybody, whether they're on this call or not, to send us their ideas and their thoughts so that we can compile them and collect them. I also would love to invite people to indicate if they want to be part of an ongoing conversation. The city and the other parties of interest will at some point start talking. And if you want to have input to that, I can't tell you how it'll be, but certainly if you join in a discussion group with us, your voice may be heard, and it's certainly better than just sitting back and letting things happen without input. So is there anything further anyone would like to talk about tonight?
One question for Nate, okay? If dam removal does happen, is there any chance of restoring rainbow smelt to the river and tomcod?
That's a super good question. I can tell you a little bit. We monitor smelt populations throughout the state. What we can tell you is the rainbow smelt populations, the anadromous ones, the coastal ones, are disappearing from the south to the north. Now, we still have some pretty strong populations up here, but we're seeing some fluctuations in our southern populations of smelt, if that's any indication, like on the Kennebec and on the Androscoggin and further down. And the other species that you mentioned was tomcod. We know a little bit about tomcod. They're also called frostfish. It's coming up on spawning time for them. We usually contact them the same time we fish through the ice for smelt. And the short answer to a long and very complicated question is, yeah, there's a possibility, absolutely, of reestablishing populations. So sometimes it happens on its own right. Sometimes it can be augmented.
Could I clarify something?
Go ahead.
Yes, personally, I'm not absolutely opposed to removing the dam. I just wanted to point out that there was some value to having the dam as it is in terms of recreation. I just, that be part of the discussion. In the long term, my personal interest would be that that the dam does come down, and that the river be restored, as others have discussed it. So I just want to make sure that everyone didn't leave with the impression that I was necessarily actively opposed to removing the dam.
Thank you, Sid.
I'm opposed to industrialization of the area, but the dam is a separate issue.
Yeah, I don't think any of the parties in discussion here today are proposing to industrialize any aspect of the river. I have a couple more questions that have come in. Do we know how much of the lower reservoir would remain if the dam was removed? I think that would be part of the study that we made. They would make cross-section analysis of what the slope of the river was and what the riverbed was and what removal of the dam would result in. That will be part of the study that will be made if we decide to go forward with that. Is that correct, Nate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then let's see. I have some other good people giving good information. Someone says that ecotourism is a substantial contributor to our economy. And they've identified several groups that have helped with dam restoration elsewhere. Someone says, Dave Sprague says, being a member of Trout Unlimited, I can say good brook trout habitat is high on their list for help. So that's good. And then there's a question, would Belfast Water District be willing to donate land or sell at a discount for conservation? I know early on in this process, they certainly were talking about a very accommodating way to handle the ownership. Again, it's been a couple of years since those conversations occurred, so we'll have to see what they do now. But clearly, if the city and other parties begin talking, and the water district is part of that discussion, we'll find out what their needs are.
Yeah, and just adding on that, there are, Coastal Mountains perspective, our discussions with the water district about that property predate Nordic. There was talk about a bargain sale for that property from a few years ago, as Joan mentioned. We've asked them to consider donating an easement or the property, and they're considering it. Again, it all kind of needs to wait until Nordic issue is resolved.
So I'd like to thank everyone for participating. We'll be uploading a recording of this meeting onto our Belfast Climate Crisis Committee YouTube page this week, where you can see some other programs also. And again, I do encourage everyone to send us emails with their thoughts and opinions and their willingness and desire to continue participating. Again, thank you very much. Have a good night. Thank you, Nate, for pitching in.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
You too.